So what we're going to do is we're going to play some clips. We're going to talk about music, talk about the clips. And afterwards, we'll have some time where we can take some questions from you guys. There's 2 microphones set up here, so when we finish with the clips, you can come up and ask your question in the microphone. I'll give you more information as we're moving along. So let's get right into it. The first thing we're going to see and hear is Busby Berkeley, 1934, Dames, incredible, which features the track "I Only Have Eyes for You."
Yeah, I'm a big fan of old musicals, and Busby Berkeley was a choreographer. Now, some of the 30s films that he did with Warner Brothers that were all shot in Los Angeles, I think Dames was shot in Burbank at the Warner Brothers stages. He's an interesting character, Busby Berkeley, because he was actually not a dancer. He's like one of the most famous choreographers ever. And he was a theater kid, and then he went to the First World War. And in the First World War, he had 2 jobs, both which factor into his movies. One of them, he was a drill instructor, and he also did aerial reconnaissance. And then also when he was working on Broadway, because his mother, I think, was a Broadway actress, he would be in some plays, but he would also kind of be around the stage. And so he pretty much designed some shots just by things that, like, a lot of the shots in his movies are things that you couldn't do on stage. So, sometimes when you see musicals, they sort of conform to the idea of the proscenium arch and what you could see. But Busby Berkeley sort of like broke out all of that and gave us angles that you just can't do on the stage, on a stage musical. So it's interesting, like, not only was he like a drill instructor in the army, which kind of factors into even a clip like this, but also, doing his aerial reconnaissance, he became obsessed with like overhead shots. And then also, like, when he was like sort of hanging out literally in the rafters of these Broadway theaters, he'd look at the dancers like looking down. And there's not too many overhead shots in this one, but the other thing about something like Dames is that a lot of those movies of the time, another director does the drama bits.
Right, he just does parts.
And he does these parts, which are sort of like
the best bits.
The best bits of the movie. No disrespect to the director or the rest of it, but pretty much a lot of the 30s Busby Berkeley films, they sort of have the same plot of like getting a musical together and all of the sort of trials and tribulations of putting on a Broadway showstopper. And then, you have like musical set pieces throughout. And then at a certain point, you have things which are entirely magical that are supposed to be on stage, but like could never exist on the stage. I mean, the other thing about like these sequences is that, nobody would really bother to do them at this scale anymore. Like, if you were going to make a musical set piece in a Busby Berkeley style in this day and age, I'm sure you'd be asked to do it with CG. Oh, can we digitally multiply the dancers? So I think, in this sequence, there's like 250 dancers, which, if any of you work in the business, that's a lot of money. But also back in those days, this was like before they really had like proper unions and hours.
Right.
So when they used to shoot these sequences,
they just fed them.
They just, these people were existing sort of on a diet of like uppers and working like. I mean, that's not a scandalous accusation. That's literally what happened. Is that back then they would be shooting for like over 24 hours. They would still be shooting like it was like a wild 80s music video, and they're just kind of like running and running until literally people fall over and die. I'm not sure that anybody died during the making of this set piece. But it is something that, like, I think some of these ones in this list, so we've got some clips from my work and a lot of clips of music of things that I like in film. And a lot of them are things that like made a big impression upon me when I was young. So even like somebody like Busby Berkeley would be a name that my mother would say quite a lot. And before I'd necessarily seen the original movies, I'd certainly seen photos of them, and I'd definitely seen them ripped off in other things. Like probably the first time I ever saw like a Busby Berkeley style music number was in like the Muppet movie, So he's like one of those people where like just his style and the way that he approaches it, as you notice even in this clip, there's not actually a lot of dancing. It's really sort of about, like I said, the sort of drill instructor thing. It's about the formations and the shapes that he makes with the dancers and their costumes and the
music.
reflections.
And the music. I mean,
Yeah.
this piece of music has been covered like 1,000 times. It's a very famous piece of music.
Well, what's amazing is that in a lot of these musicals, these songs were written for the film.
Right.
You know, so it's like this song, I Only Have Eyes for You, which you've heard a million times, was actually written for Dames.
Yeah.
So that's kind of extraordinary.
Harry Warren wrote the music.
Yeah, I mean, and the two actors who feature in this is Dick Powell, who's in a lot of these movies, and Ruby Keeler, who's also in a lot of these movies. She's also in 42nd Street. And as you'll see in this clip, this is probably the most Ruby Keeler that you could possibly get in one sequence. So
Great. Let's check it out.
let's watch a clip from Dames. It would be very difficult to do that today. That's the thing. It's like, so even with today's technology, it's still like
the opening of the Chinese Olympics, right? It's the closest thing you can get, but that costs, like you said, zillions of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, it's I always just like when you watch those movies, I always just bowled over by the amount of work that went into it. It's crazy. And back in those days, that they would, you know, all of those dancers would be on contract. So Busby Berkeley would be running his musicals unit, and I think he'd just be shooting like separately from the movie.
Right.
So it's kind of something that doesn't really exist in this day and age. The idea of like, oh, there's like the musical unit that are doing these amazing set pieces. But he would be sort of operating on his own budget and with his own kind of like cast of dancers, almost completely separately from the rest of the film.
Wow. Okay, we need to keep moving. We got a lot of clips. So now we're going to ping pong. We're going to play something of Edgar's. And we're kind of working a bit chronologically. So we're going to play something now from the TV series you did called Spaced. From the year of 2001, I believe. I'm not sure which episode this is from.
This is from the second series, as we say in the UK, not season. Second series of Spaced from 2001. There were only 2 series. I directed every episode. And I guess, you know, we can talk a little bit about the clip afterwards, but I think one of the things that happened with this show was, you know, I was 24 when I did the first series of Spaced. And I know. And
you were 50 when you ended.
I felt 50 when I ended, especially by the end of the second series. It was a very intensive, because we didn't really have the money, like sort of like, you know, bigger comedy shows. And so it always like, you know, everything is up on screen. But one of the things that happened with Spaced, actually, prior to this, I had got into the industry through I'd done amateur films when I was a kid, and then I'd gone to art college briefly, and not doing a film and TV course, but doing a sort of design course. But I kept making these kind of goofy movies, and not goofy movie like the Disney one.
I'd like to see that.
I directed, I don't know if you know that, I directed a goofy movie. No, don't spread that around. So I can't remember how I got into doing TV was, I made a film when I was 20 years old, a very, very low budget, silly Western that was, you know, it's pretty silly. Has anybody ever seen it? Did anybody see it at Cine Family when we showed it a couple of years ago? Anyway, the thing is, it got released, I don't want to say it got released in theaters, it got released in theater, one theater.
That's all you need.
In London. But actually, two people that saw it were these 2 comedians, Matt Lucas and David Walliams, who went on to do Little Britain. And literally, as soon as that was, like, the film was on, they asked me to direct their first TV show, which was a sketch show called Mash and Peas. And then David had actually been to university with Simon Pegg. So I met Simon Pegg around that time, and I went straight on to do another TV show literally that next year when I was like 21 that had Simon and Jessica Hines in it. So then those 2 on that show got on really well. And then Space came around. It took them sort of 3 years to develop it. And so then we were shooting I think we started shooting in 99, and we did 2 seasons of it. One of the things that happened, though, which kind of had a bearing on everything else, it was somewhere where there wasn't really any music written into the script. Maybe there were a couple of thoughts of things, but it very quickly became clear that the series needed like a vibe. And at that time, you know, on network TV, you had a sort of overall clearance thing where you could sort of clear just tracks, unless it was something major, like you couldn't clear like the Beatles or Led Zeppelin. But things of a certain level, you could pretty easily clear it for the network. So I sort of became the music supervisor on the show, essentially, because nobody else was doing it. It was a very small crew. And so a lot of the music of the time, sort of a lot of that big beat and loungecore stuff and some sort of indie stuff found its way into the show. And so I have sort of fond memories of whilst we were editing the show, there used to be a Virgin Megastore around the corner, and I used to just go and rifle through the CD racks and find songs for the show. And usually it would be like something, trying to find things that were like something else. So if we had some Fatboy Slim tracks in there, it's like, well, what else is like Fatboy Slim? It's like, oh, Bentley Rhythm Ace, like Lemon Jelly, like all these other artists. But I have, like, when I think of editing Spaced, I think of that sound that you don't really hear anymore, is the clacking through the jewel cases on CDs. Standing.
You still hear that in my house.
Well, that's something that, like, I think of that sound when I think of like editing the show. I didn't edit it. I edited some parts of it. Actually, this episode is one of the ones where I'm credited as an editor. And in fact, the editor of this episode with me, Paul Matchless, is also one of the editors on Baby Driver. So I've like worked with him this far back.
Cool.
So this is the clip. This is probably my from my favorite episode of both seasons. So we'll watch a bit of Spaced. I like the idea that if you were doing an imaginary gunfight, it doesn't really explain why. If you were doing an imaginary gunfight, why would your gun jam?
for realistic purposes, right?
I know they mimed the gunfight and all of the things that could possibly go wrong. I love that sequence, but I never don't laugh when the guy whose name is Alex Noodle starts spraying his blood.
Alex Noodle.
Alex Noodle. So that was the instance. I don't think necessarily, unlike some of the later sequences that we're going to watch, I don't think necessarily that we had that. Maybe I had that music in mind. A lot of Spaced, the music was put on afterwards. But then I think in the second series, once we realized how well the soundtrack worked on the first one, there was some kind of like thinking ahead of like things that could work in sequences. But it was a great experience because nobody's really telling me what to do at any point, like,
or how to do it.
Or how to do it. It's one of those things where you don't realize how lucky you are until later that you were sort of left alone. Yeah. You know, the channel, like, because we were under a certain budget level, they would sort of give us script notes, but then on the second series, they would barely give us that. You would get notes where it would be like, the only things that they would tell you is, hey, you can only say fuck twice and you can't say cunt. I don't know why fuck twice and what a third one would do, but
that's changed a lot now, though.
It was. It definitely changed a lot. But the difference between the UK TV and over here is that on network TV, that's why cable has never really taken off in the UK. It's because you can do those things on TV, and a lot of cable shows just get shown on network TV after like 9 o'clock. Yeah. So Space used to be on in between Friends and Frasier.
Perfect.
And my proudest moment was I think it's the third episode of the first series, which starts with as a zombie sort of killing episode, which ended up inspiring Shaun of the Dead in a way. And I remember vividly that the announcer at the start of it says, and Friends has just ended. So imagine you've just had Central Perk, and then the announcer says, next up, Spaced, which features strong language and violent imagery from the start. And I was like, yes! Immediately lose 50% of Friends viewers.
Okay, well, that was interesting because
it factors into the next one.
Yeah, and also I like the fact that it sounded like it went from a licensed music to the gunfire, which became slightly musical, and then there was a change in the tone of the music where it became more scored and more, you know, sort of sounding like the character is kind of dying. And so I don't know how aware you were of it at the time, but you were developing.
Yeah,
2001.
I think also it's the shift in like sort of that at first they're sort of miming. They get much more slow motion towards the end. So it starts out with the track by the Blue Zones, and then it ends up with I think it's Adagio for strings because it's in Platoon. Right. So that's the kind of music from Platoon when sort of like Willem Dafoe is like dying like that. So So, that was a little film reference in itself, the second part of the music. But yeah, I think and the adagio for strings thing, maybe that was written into the script. I can't actually remember, but, it was something that definitely we're thinking about that as we're shooting that scene. I mean, I have very fond memories of shooting that. It's literally, if you've ever been to Camden in London, it's literally like 2 minutes walk from the tube. It's just funny. It's just like an alley around the back of the main high street. But yeah, it leads into the next clip in a way.
Yeah, epic. Ennio Morricone, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1967.
Yeah. Well, there's something interesting about how this was made, and maybe we'll talk about this afterwards. But I'd say this is another director and a film that my parents are both art teachers. They had no connections in the film business, but they were film fans. And there were various directors or films I would hear about through my parents. And like they talk about Alfred Hitchcock a lot. I remember my mum mentioning Busby Berkeley quite a lot, but also like Sergio Leone was something that they talked about quite a lot. And so I think when these films were on TV, I was probably allowed to stay up and watch them because they thought that they were somewhat appropriate. But we could talk about how this is made. But I think this is from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and is this probably one of the greatest climaxes in cinema with score by Ennio Morricone. So let's watch that. The thing that's interesting about that, which I remember reading about, which sort of factors into, even the next clip we're going to show, and definitely into Baby Driver, is that Ennio Morricone had written that music before they started filming. And so with that sequence, they are playing that music on set, which I think sort of creates in terms of because the actors, if you were getting them to kind of just stand there in silence, the actors might start to think, oh, this is weird, the amount of pause or something like that. But because they can hear it and hear how dramatic it is and how it's building, it's sort of adding to their performance. So that's something that, in a lot of Italian films, they don't shoot any sync sound. They dub it all later, especially with a film like that where you've got, American actors and Spanish actors and Italian actors. All of the sound is done afterwards. So they could, in theory, play that music and Sergio Leone be yelling things during the take to tell them what to do. But it is something as well, that the other thing about those movies, and they're probably some of the first Westerns I saw, so I was slightly spoiled by seeing them first. But, a lot of the Italian directors of that time, they didn't have the budget of the American films, so they make up for it in style. So you have these movies that are kind of pop art masterpieces where they're going heavy on the style of the editing and the camera shots and the music, because they don't always have the budgets of the big American films. Although that cemetery is built for the movie. That is not an existing cemetery. Apparently they got the Spanish army employed sort of hundreds of Spanish troops to make that cemetery in sort of 72 hours. So that sort of cemetery exists only for the movie, which is an incredible set in itself. But he's, Ennio Morricone is obviously one of the greatest composers, but a lot of those Italian filmmakers that use score and, like that, like another one, Dario Argento and the use of Goblin. If you've ever seen Suspiria, that's another movie where the score is so heavy in the movie, it almost dominates everything else. And it's another thing where you sort of can tell when you watch the movie, it's the score is kind of done before, and they're just playing it over what they have.
But it's also very, like you were saying, the style of it is quite unique with the guitars, with the singing, with all that stuff. Morricone was doing 12 movies a year too.
Yeah.
And he didn't have Pro Tools. He had to write these themes, then do all these variations of the one theme. But I think in 67, 68, 69, it's incredible how many movies he did.
Yeah.
I don't know how you could do that. Without a computer, they're all real players. He's sitting down and,
Yeah, and also he's also Ennio Morricone in the later. There are some scores of his 80s movies that are great, which are basically redone versions of his 60s scores of films that he figures nobody has seen. So his score for the Untouchables, which is fantastic, is basically the score for another movie called, I think, Revolver. It's almost exactly the same score. But he kind of figured quite rightly, he goes, nobody's seen Revolver, let's just use it again for the Untouchables. The best example of that happening, which is an amazing story, has anybody ever heard of the silly like knockoff Star Wars movie called Star Crash with David Hasselhoff. It probably was on Mystery Science Theater. So John Barry did the score for that movie, and he did the score sight unseen. He had not seen the movie. He did the score before the movie. And the score is pretty good. The score is the best thing about it. It's John Barry, who's an Oscar-winning composer. But he had not seen Star Crash. And then he sees Star Crash, and he's like, this film is terrible. Cut to like 7 years later, he's scoring Out of Africa with Meryl Streep. He's, nobody's seen Star Crash. I'll just use the music from Star Crash.
And wins
the Oscar. So if you ever watch Out of Africa, just think that it's the music from Star Crash. The Oscar-winning music from Star.
They're such similar movies. I mean, okay. Now we're gonna play a music video that you directed.
Oh yeah.
By the Manchester band Mint Royale.
Yeah. So this is a music video. I guess I haven't done. I mean, I think I've done in total like 10 music videos, spread over like 20 years maybe. I guess the last one I did was in 2014, and the first one I did was probably in 1995. But I've only done 10 total, and maybe in between like Spaced and Shaun of the Dead, I did a couple of music videos. When I was doing music videos in the UK, I was kind of hitting that point already where, so I guess it's around the time of file sharing, where the budgets were just going down. And so I had this weird thing where I was having more success with music videos as the budgets were getting lower each time. So like the first one that I'd done after Space was like a 60 grand video, and then it was going down to sort of 30, 20, 10, 6.
Make it on your phone.
Yeah. So this was one of the sort of cheaper ones, but like sort of what was interesting about this is that when I used to do music videos, I would usually do it to try something out. So if there's something that I haven't done, and you basically come up with a treatment based on something that you would like to do, and hope that the band agrees with it. There's another music video that I did after hours that was all in one shot on a Steadicam, and I did that because I knew in Shaun of the Dead I'd written this scene that was going to be all in one, and I'd never done an all-in-one Steadicam shot, so I thought I'll do a dry run on this music video. This one is a bit different because this is basically like a dry run for the first scene of Baby Driver. However, I didn't write the Baby Driver idea for this video. I basically had that kind of like sort of exam cramming thing where the night before I was supposed to hand in a treatment for Mint Royale, I hadn't come up with an idea that I liked. And so I'd already had the idea for Baby Driver. Like I had the first part of the idea of like the first scene, which we'll see later on, in like 1995 when I first heard the John Spencer Blues Explosion. I'd had the idea for the first scene. I sort of knew vaguely what the rest of the film was, but I didn't have a plot. But I definitely had the first scene and the idea of like the driver goofing off to music in the car. So I basically, in a fit of desperation, I wrote this treatment for this music video, and it turned out well. And you know, there are lots of British comedians in it that you'll recognize, especially if you're fans of the Mighty Boosh and Spaced. But the thing was, afterwards, after I'd done it, I was mad at myself for a while because I thought, oh, I burned this great idea for this movie on this music video.
Away.
And I gave it away. And what a waste. What a waste of that idea. But then weirdly, over the years, and I got to thank Noel Fielding and the success of the Mighty Boosh for this video just kept sort of echoing around. Like this video was shot in 2002 and released in 2003. Literally, it was released a couple of months before I started shooting Shaun of the Dead. And basically, but even like 10 years later, people would still like be posting it on the internet like it was a new video. And I think even it crops up on one of the Mighty Boosh DVDs. So it actually ended up being a help, because then by the time I was thinking about actually doing the movie, when I started talking about it more seriously, like 10 years ago, especially in like 2010, after Scott Pilgrim came out, this video was still sort of in the ether. And there was even a funny thing, like I remember at the LA Film Festival in 2010, I did this like talk of like clips from my movies, and J.J. Abrams was moderating, and he said, hey, can we show that Getaway Driver music video that you did? And I said, yeah. And then whilst the clip was playing, J.J. leant over to me and said, I think this would make a great movie. And I leant back and said, I am way ahead of you. Well, it still took 7 years, but this is, if you haven't seen it before, This is the dry run for Baby Driver. This is Mint Royale and Blue Song. No car chase at the end of that, though. That had to come later. Didn't have the funds to do a car chase back in 2002.
Yeah, that's such a clip. But the Fatboy Slim and that whole time.
Yeah.
2001, 2002, 2003. I'm telling you, sitting right there with the bass pumping, it kind of helps not date the music.
Well, it's also funny, I guess around that time, actually, that a lot of those artists, it did actually inspire a lot of great music videos because most of those people are not in the videos. Yeah. So if you actually think about it, Chemical Brothers, Fatboy Slim, they have lots of great videos by Spy Jones, Michel Gondry, etc. Partly because the artists are not featuring. There's no vocalist to lip sync it. So it actually with music videos, it gave people an open brief. So with something like that, the band are in there briefly, they walk past the car, but they're not even singing. It's a Captain Beefheart sample. So it actually sort of let you kind of come up with wilder ideas. That whole sort of spate of superstar DJ tracks.
Do you still have a portable Discman?
No, I don't think I ever had a portable Discman.
Does anybody? Because I have one and it's broken. And just the other day I went to Best Buy because I heard they sell them there. Insignia sells them for $17.99.
Oh.
I didn't buy one, but. Okay, so we're going to move now into one of the greatest sci-fi movie, probably the greatest sci-fi movie of all time, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah. And this is maybe not the most obvious clip of this. I think if you're predicting what clip it is, it's not going to be in the most two famous clips. It's leading into one of the most famous sequences. But this is something that as another movie that my parents introduced me to, and I think when I first watched it on TV, I was already into Star Wars by that point, and then obviously this film is a lot more adult and a lot more enigmatic. But even as a kid, not really understanding it, it still sort of wielded real sort of power over me. And I wasn't grown up, my parents didn't take me and my brothers to church at all, so I have no religious upbringing. So in a weird way, something like 2001 is about as close as it comes to sort of a religious experience for me. And particularly there's a shot in this bit, you'll see it where the planets and the monolith come into alignment that I just think, it's just, to me, it's that's the sort of if there's some kind of proof of some higher power, it's just the idea of symmetry in space, and so this is a movie and it's one of those movies that I'm sure other people in the audience feel the same way, is that when it's on at the cinema, I go and see it because I just have to see it on the big screen, and it almost feels like going to see something in a gallery for 2.5 hours. The other thing that's interesting about this is, which is, there's films which, this is a sort of key film in terms of the film soundtrack, in terms of actually using existing source. Using songs that already exist or pieces of music that already exist. Because the story with 2001 that's interesting is Stanley Kubrick had commissioned a composer called Alex North to do the score. And he did the score. But by the time Alex North had done the score, Stanley Kubrick had got so used to the guide tracks, the temp tracks, which were these songs that are in the film, because him and his editors had bought a bunch of classical music albums, trying to find the right thing. Strauss and and Ligeti.
Ligeti.
Ligeti on this clip.
Who was alive at the time too.
Yeah.
And wasn't all that well known.
He also, I read something that was interesting, is that Ligeti liked the film and liked the use of his music in the film, but was annoyed that Richard Strauss and Johann Strauss were in the same movie. But here's an interesting thing. This is one of the first examples of, which happens a lot later. Exactly the same thing happened with the Exorcist score, which is why Tubular Bells is on that movie, is that Lalo Schifrin had done a score, but William Friedkin had got used to the temp music and chucked the score out. So basically, Alex North's score went unused because Stanley Kubrick and his editors thought it was just more impactful with the temp music they'd used.
Well, and Alex North was a very kind of great but conventional composer. He did North by Northwest and all these wonderful movies.
You can actually get
his score. Yeah, and I think this sequence he's released it as called Metamorphosis or something. Or no, I'm jumping ahead.
But this
you
is
can get it.
This is an incredible. The whole movie is incredible to me, and I think also because at the time they're sort of cutting edge technology in terms of using miniatures and opticals and trying to show sort of like deep space in a way that had never been seen on screen.
And it's only like a $10-12 million movie. It wasn't not an expensive movie to make.
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is that like sort of this film is like 49 years old. Yeah, it'd be 50 years old next year. And even though obviously like special effects have come a long way since, it's still very powerful. And yeah, so this is one of a sequence that kind of, when I see this at the cinema, this sequence kind of has me cowering in my seat just with the sort of the sheer power of the sound.
I'm really curious to know if Kubrick showed the temp music to Alex North. Like, dude, this is what I like. Check this out. Because that's just, I mean, Ligeti experimented with all these ways of making tone clusters, and that's with soprano, with voices and stuff, and it just sounds like the future still.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether he
showed it to him.
Oh, yeah. I don't know whether he did show it to him. I mean, usually
I doubt it. He was such a big composer to be like, I don't want to see it.
Yeah, and sometimes people don't want to like. I mean, a lot of composers don't want to hear any temp music, and especially sometimes, even if you're trying to be nice and temp it with their own music, they're like, oh no, turn this off. I don't want to hear it with my own music either. So I have no idea whether he actually heard the temp, but like,
I bet he
it's difficult to top that. And also, it's clearly like the editors edited it to the Ligeti.
Yeah.
It's still like, astonishing, that sequence. I mean, it's amazing to think that that's 49 years old because it still looks incredible.
I know, and there's no Strauss or Wagner in The Shining. Okay, so now let's move on to 2004, Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah, there's no real link between 2001 and Shaun of the Dead.
That's why I jumped right into it.
Yeah, so this is... I'm not even going to tell you which scene it is because you can guess. So this was absolutely written into the script, and this song was written into the script. I'll tell you afterwards what the B choice was, but like this was something as well. Again, in sort of anticipation. Like I said, I've been thinking about Baby Driver for all this time, but this is the first time I'd done a sequence where we had a piece of music playing, and we had it playing in on the set, so that the actors could hear it as they were performing the sequence. It was the first time that I'd ever used earwigs, which is basically where like there's a little transistor, so
It's like a radio.
yeah. So the actor can hear the music, but we can still record dialogue. So they can hear it, but the microphones can't pick it up. So basically, we had earwigs for like the actors, and I think the camera operator as well. And it was also the first time that I'd really done a sequence where I'd actually had a music choreographer. In fact, the same choreographer who did Blue Song, a woman called Litza Bixler, who's amazing, had her and a stunt coordinator at the same time. And I think unlike some of the later ones like Scott Pilgrim and Baby Driver, in this one it wasn't the perfect kind of blend yet in terms of, I felt on the day that when we were doing this sequence, the stunt guys or stunt coordinator sort of stood back and said, oh no, this is your bit, and sort of stood in the corner with his arms folded. I think then on later movies, especially like working with like Brad Allen on Scott Pilgrim and working with Ryan Heffington and Darren Prescott on Baby Driver, that was a thing where it became like a proper team effort. This was like getting there, and I'm very happy with the sequence, but it wasn't something where it was moving in this sort of direction of like two very disparate departments like dance and stunts working together. But well, we can talk a bit more about it afterwards, but this is a clip from Shaun of the Dead. That movie was not an expensive movie, and so we'd written Queen into the script, but I don't think it was until we were maybe even when we'd started shooting that we knew we got it cleared. Right. So that was quite nerve-wracking because we were really banking on that song.
Did you have to show it to them?
No. I don't think so. And in fact, the reason that like You're My Best Friend by Queen is the end credit version of the song, is on the end credits, is because when we were writing the script, I had Queen's Greatest Hits on CD, and I would play it, and we would play this song because we were going to use this song, and then You're My Best Friend was the next song up on that album. And so every time that would come on, I said to Sam, this would be good for the end credits. Because the first lyric is, ooh, you're making me live. You've just seen Ed as a zombie, spoiler alert. But I remember that we didn't know for sure whether we had it when we started, and our B choice for this sequence was Rasputin by Boney M. Which, see, that's exactly why we didn't use it. It's because that song means something in like Europe and like Australia, but nothing in the States. But I'm telling you, go home and YouTube Rasputin by Boney M, your new favorite song.
It's a party.
It's an amazing song. I mean, but it would have like had tumbleweeds at the Vista in Los Angeles. So, but the other thing that's interesting about that was the other reason I used that song is I was a big Queen fan growing up. I used to love this song. But at the time before the movie, this wasn't one of Queen's most famous songs.
No, not at all.
You know, at the time, and even the crazy thing, there's this Queen musical, We Will Rock You, and I went to see it maybe about a couple of years before I did this. And Don't Stop Me Now is not really in the musical, which I was like, how could you miss that? Like, it's the most obvious like musical number. And they even make a silly joke where somebody starts singing Don't Stop Me Now, and somebody else goes, stop, and they never sing the song, which to me was really dumb. And I didn't really like the musical, and that was one of the reasons. I later found out, way later, that Brian May doesn't really like the song. It's a Freddie Mercury composition.
Yeah, it's Freddie.
Freddie wrote it, and I think at the time, it was when Freddie had his own PR guy, and I found an interview later that Brian May said, I never liked Don't Stop Me Now because I can't think of the song without thinking of Freddie's PR guy going, that's the single, guys, Don't Stop Me Now. So he basically got annoyed that this song was getting kind of pushed. So it's funny, like, so I didn't really get any response from Queen. I mean, about the movie particularly, but weirdly enough, like, Brian May did respond to the use of Brighton Rock in Baby Driver because he wrote that one.
Of course.
And he tweeted about it the other day to say how much he liked the film and liked the use of Brighton Rock. But I was very happy to use this song and like sort of, you know, and actually after it, I'm not claiming credit for it becoming more famous. I guess I am claiming credit. But it did actually start appearing in a lot of like adverts afterwards. And
I don't think it was a hit here in this country. Maybe a minor hit because you had Fat Bottom Girls and Bicycle, which were like
from the same album.
Powerhouses. From Jazz, the same record.
Yeah.
I always loved that song.
Oh yeah, it's a great song. But so that was the first time really that I'd, you know, sort of like done something where not just playing the music on set. There've been other things like obviously music videos or things in space where we played the music. There's something where we're really like timing it out. And like everybody sort of like, you know, is you know, can hear the different parts. And, you know, it's very strange to be out doing a night shoot in the middle of South London with a bunch of zombies, also blasting Don't Stop Me Now. So yeah, it was, and it, you know, it was exactly as I hoped that the sequence would turn out. And I was very happy when that became sort of one of the most sort of standout sequences in the film.
Yeah, and then you knew that you could do more things like that.
Yes. It's definitely another trial run. There is a link into the next one, though, I think.
Yes.
If I'm right in thinking. Oh, yes. So the next clip is one of the movies, I think sort of all of the sort of horror comedies that sort of had some influence on Shaun of the Dead, this is probably has the most influence on it. Not a zombie film, though, although it does feature zombies. But John Landis's American Werewolf in London, I think it's like one of my top 3 desert island movies of all time. And I saw it when I was too young to see it at the cinema. But I remember when it came out in 1981, so I must have been 6 or 7. There was this magazine. It was like our version of Fangoria. There was a magazine called Starburst, and they had this especially gory cover of David Norton surrounded by all the zombies from the cinema. And it was incredibly bloody. And my parents used to buy me and my brother this sci-fi magazine, Starburst. It used to get more and more gory and have complaints about it. But like, I just could not believe this kind of photo of this movie. And then reading the coverage of it. This is like 3 years before I saw the thing. So it's that weird thing when back in the days, you know, pre-internet and stuff, when you're relying on books and magazines, you know, that you would get obsessed by movies you hadn't seen. You know, you look at the stills, you'd know everything about it. And I remember the first time it was on network TV, 1984, maybe 3 years after it came out. I was only 10 by then, and my parents knew how obsessed me and my brother were with the movie, so they let us stay up to watch it. However, if you've seen the movie, there's a particularly gory flashback with like Nazi demons, And at a point where somebody's throat gets slit very gorily, my mum was like, "Okay, that's enough, bed." And I was sent, which is also a bad policy because then I had terrible nightmares.
Yeah.
Because I didn't see the monster vanquished at the end. There's no resolution of the film for me. So it actually gave me worse nightmares than if I'd watched the whole thing.
Which is why you're sitting here. So
Yeah. Although if I had stayed watching about another 10 minutes, I would have had to watch the Jenny Agutter nude shower scene with my mum and dad, which would have been equally embarrassing. But I obviously finally saw the movie, and it sort of just quickly became, and still is, I think this is one of those movies that's just like, and I think when you cross genres together, if you do films that are two genres in one, like a comedy, horror, something like that, no two movies are the same. You know, things just have their completely unique tone. And this is one of those movies that not only does it have a unique tone in itself, but also within John Landis' filmography. He never really did a film that's exactly like it. The other reason, of course, that this is extraordinary to me is that I think, and this is one of the things that kind of went on to influence me in a big way, is when I think of films which have like a jukebox soundtrack that using source music, not music composed for the film, using pop songs. There's like, and obviously 2001 in a weird way or something like that, they're using like classical hits. The other big ones, like growing up, that would have a big influence on me would be American Graffiti, George Lucas's movie, which is kind of wall-to-wall rock and roll hits, all playing on radios and stuff. American Werewolf in London, like hugely influential because it's all of a theme. All of the songs in the movie have moon in the title.
Yeah.
So you open with, there's like 3 covers of Blue Moon, including one in this clip. There's like Moon Dance by Van Morrison, Bad Moon Rising. Curiously, not Werewolf in London by Warren Zevon, not in the movie, strangely. There were some ones I think he wanted to use that couldn't use, like he couldn't use Moon Shadow by Cat Stevens. He couldn't use Elvis's version of Blue Moon. But this one, and then along with some other ones, one of which we'll see later, like just the use of pop music. But I think when I saw this when I was 10, I'd never seen a movie like it. And it has some score as well, but the choice to kind of stick to a theme of particular songs and nearly always be counter-scoring. So especially in this scene as the beautiful Blue Moon cover is going against the action.
This is the version sung by Sam Cooke.
Yes.
And this is the scene where I had said that it was scored and it was called released later as Metamorphosis. And this was scored by Elmer Bernstein, the great Elmer Bernstein. So he scored the sequence, but then they decided to use the Sam Cooke version. And the movie opens with Blue Moon, and it also closes with Blue Moon. So
an amazing cover of Blue Moon at the
versions.
end. Yeah, it's incredible. I think
they didn't have iTunes back then, so they could only think of like 5 Moon songs.
I think they wanted to use Elvis's one, and they also wanted to use Bob Dylan, but they couldn't. But like this sequence is just incredible. I mean, the other thing about this sequence, I'm sure many of you have seen this Oscar-winning sequence. This actually got. This movie got the first ever. They created the Academy Award for special effects and makeup for this movie.
This is 1981.
1981. So they created a category for the movie because it's such extraordinary work. And also, this transformation sequence is kind of like, at the time, and still now, it got John Landis the job directing Michael Jackson's Thriller. But it's also like notable for the fact that all previous werewolf transformations or transformations of film are always done in the dark, in the shadows, because it's easier to hide in the shadows and hide some of the effects. And this one is in like sort of very harsh light. That movie is just incredible to me. I never. Also, the best cutaway to Mickey Mouse ever.
Yeah, is that an homage, you think?
I'm not sure. I also just think it's kind of like it's just a funny thing to cut to. I'm actually surprised they gave them the clearance to use it in like an X-rated movie.
Oh, come on, that's incredible. It took them 6 days to do that sequence.
Rick Baker, amazing makeup artist, LA native. And won the first Oscar for that. And that's, like I said, that's like Michael Jackson saw that movie and is like, called him up to do Thriller.
Let's rip that off, yeah.
But also that movie it's such a simple idea and it's such a clever idea to sort of use the different like moon themed songs. And sometimes it's working perfectly with the movie, like Van Morrison, which is a romantic song, is like soundtracking the sex scene. But in that's having that kind of like beautiful Sam Cooke cover against all of that, sort of
the Foley,
screaming
the
and
sound
bone
design.
breaking. It's amazing.
Yeah, I quite like the sound design there.
Oh, it's amazing.
It's not too big. It's perfect. Okay. Moving along to Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Yes. I think we got 2 clips of this, like sort of.
We do.
This movie. This movie was a real gift in terms of like it's based on Brian Lee O'Malley's amazing graphic novel series, and one of the interesting things, me and a writer called LA writer called Michael Poole, who we wrote the adaptation together. One of the things that was great about doing the movie is that at the very start, Brian Lee O'Malley, the writer of the comic books, he had made these playlists to go with the books for himself, and
were they any good?
Yeah, and in fact, some of the songs are in the movie. And then on the flip side, I made playlists based on what I felt when I read different books. So we sort of like started the process of the adaptation by exchanging songs. And quite a lot of the songs on both of our lists ended up in the movie. The cool thing with this one was that also in the books and in the film, there are fictional bands. And, sometimes like fictional bands in films can be like bad. There are some like great examples of like great fictional bands, Spinal Tap being the obvious one. I love a movie called Phantom of the Paradise by Brian De Palma, which has several fictional bands in it, all written by Paul Williams, who actually makes a cameo in Baby Driver. So with this, we had an idea that because there are several fictional bands in it, that we would get different people to play the different bands. So Nigel Godrich, who's like Radiohead and Beck and, the producer, this is the only film that he ever scored so far. And but he also kind of basically brought the different bands together. And I think this clip doesn't have a band bit, but it does. The second clip has some more band stuff. But this clip is like the bass-off sequence. And what's funny about this bass-off is we recorded it live. 2 guitar players that you probably know, Justin Medall Johnson and Jason Faulkner, who both play with Beck. And they basically performed the bass-off live. I think on the Blu-ray there's a video of it. So then Michael Cera and Brandon Routh basically had to kind of sort of learn to do these very intricate like bass solos. and actually Michael Cera is a really good guitarist. So he was sort of Brandon had to kind of like sort of like really like bone up to get there. But it was an amazing sort of experience doing this movie because there was so much music in it, and we had like sort of Nigel around sometimes. Nigel came to record some of the songs with the cast, or like we had the amazing thing of like, Metric did a song and then Brie Larson re-recorded the vocal, or like Beck did a whole bunch of songs and then the actors re-recorded the vocal. It was amazing because then it was really like, I think in the whole movie feels like sort of like you get a sense of the music business by having different artists do different bits. So it was an incredible like experience, like to sort of have all these artists that I love doing bits and bobs on the film. And even on the score, like sort of Nigel had members of Air, like Nicholas Godin, who you know, like
I was in Air.
Yeah, and members of Broken Social Scene and members of Supergrass and Kid Koala. There's all sorts of people playing on the actual score itself. So it's an amazing experience. And then also it's something that like, and this is very much in the books, but it's something I really wanted to do. And if anything, like Scott Pilgrim is sort of my way of like doing something a bit like Spaced on the big screen. Sort of taking that kind of like sort of pop arty, sort of highly stylized sort of comedy and doing it with like a sort of action music film. So this is one of the clips from Scott Pilgrim.
The idea of using a bass duel.
That's kind of like James
is...
Bond stuff. Yeah. Doesn't that literally happen at the start of Live and Let Die? It is. It's like in the United Nations, they start killing people with sound.
Okay,
it's happening for real.
Change the subject. Let's go back to the lovely world of... I love that there's... Whose idea was it to have a Rickenbacker and the Fender Mustang bass?
I think they're both in the comic. I think they're both
Really?
like drawn like that. We were pretty specific to what he'd drawn.
Because they're different, but they're 2 of the coolest basses.
Yeah, no,
So,
Brian Lee O'Malley knows his
well
stuff.
done.
I'm almost certain that we took it straight from the comic. But I remember we recorded that bass off at Capitol Records, like sort of not far away. And Justin and Jason did it live. So that's kind of like
So they did it while to the picture after you had done it, or you
did it before.
Wow.
And then Michael Cera and Brandon Routh basically like sort of played along with it. But what's funny is that the take is a take. Yeah. It's not us like doing one bit and then doing the other.
They're good.
They're amazing, you know. So and they're both like sort of like two of the sort of best session guitarists out there. And producers now. Justin produces now.
Justin produces. Well, Justin is a kind of bass player, and Jason Faulkner plays everything.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, that was. And with the other funny thing about that is, anybody from Toronto? Toronto, rather.
Pizza.
Because that place is a famous venue called Leeds Palace, but we actually.
I played there. Sure.
But that's a set. We recreated.
It looks a lot nicer than Leeds Palace, actually.
It's like a little bit bigger. So the Canadian bands that came to visit, like Metric and Broken Social Scene, were absolutely dumbfounded that we'd basically made a set of Leeds Palace.
Why would you do that?
Well, because you couldn't knock down the walls on the other one. It was like, I think the entire place would have come down if we'd done that. It was not necessarily a structurally sound place. In fact, actually, just after we shot the one exterior of Leeds Palace for real, it started falling apart, that building. So I wouldn't have shot that sequence in the real location. But I have fond memories of doing that bit, and there's just little images that like that are not just the idea of like Brandon Routh like pushing all of the empty like glasses along the floor, like with his telekinesis is always really. I love a lot of the details in that.
Did you live in Toronto?
Only when I was doing the film. I was there for nearly a year making the movie and had a fantastic time. I mean, that place is great, and it was at the time when there was such a sort of fertile, Broken Social Scene and all the various factions that came out of that. So, I got to know all of those bands, and
you got to also work with Chris from Sloan, right?
Yes,
another friend of mine.
Yeah.
Great band.
He was what's his surname? Chris
Murphy.
Chris Murphy. Oh yes,
Sloan.
Of course.
They're rock stars in Canada.
They're huge in Canada.
Huge.
And he was basically the kind of music teacher on the movie. So he basically kind of like the cast all had varying abilities of musicianship. Michael was really good. Like Brie Larson was really good. We had a like sort of real, and then other people had to learn their instruments. Like Alison Pill had to learn to play the drums. Mark Webber had to learn to play the guitar. So, and Chris was there. And what's funny for the Canadian members of the cast, like Michael Cera and Alison Pill.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they couldn't believe that Chris Murphy was there, basically being teacher. And in a lot of the shots, especially when Mark Webber is performing on guitar, Chris Murphy is standing to the side of the camera going, A, D, A, like sort of like basically like acting it out. And sort of so Mark Webber could basically follow what Chris Murphy was doing. So it's and also Chris Murphy was wearing the same costume as Mark Webber. So it was a very surreal thing to kind of witness. And actually, he would have been right there in the next sequence we're going to show. And this is actually like a scene later on in the movie, which is probably one of the wildest music sequences. Oh no, we're going to show a different one.
Yeah, we're going to ping pong. We're going to play something, and then we're going to come back.
That's right.
To Scott Pilgrim. We'll talk more about that.
I was saying before about like highly influential movies on me soundtrack-wise. American Graffiti, American Werewolf in London, Reservoir Dogs is obviously another obvious one. But then I think the other movie that like, I think when I saw this when I was like 15, maybe when it came out, or 16, it was Goodfellas. And the use of, it's a different one first?
Yeah, sorry, these notes were for me to read.
Oh, you're right. You're right. It's a different one first. We'll come back to Goodfellas.
We're being chronological. We'll get to Goodfellas in a minute.
You're absolutely right. This is a different one. Okay. This is from a film called Mauvais from 1985. And this is a director called Leo Carax. I don't know if anybody, some of you might know this film. Leo Carax is a French director who's only really done a handful of films. A film called Boy Meets Girl, another one called Les Amants de Pont-Neuf, called Lovers on the Bridge in the States. French title is better. Also, and then more recently, you might have seen his film Holy Motors, which is a fantastic movie. Nearly all of them star Dennis Levant, and nearly all of them have some amazing sequence featuring like a pop song. And this is like from his 1985 film featuring a young Dennis Levant. And I think, as a big David Bowie fan, I think this is the best use of David Bowie in a film ever. This isn't the most high-quality clip, but I really wanted to show this one because it's the sort of clip that I obsess about, and I just think especially because it's not a big budget movie. This is a French movie. It's sort of like an AIDS metaphor about a disease that's killing people who have sex without emotion. Mauvais sang means bad blood. This is a short sequence using David Bowie, and I just think it's incredible. So let's watch that, and then we'll talk about Goodfellas and Scott Pilgrim later. I just think that's an astounding shot, and most of his movies feature some incredible musical set piece. What's also I love in that is just the fact that they've painted or pasted the walls for like several blocks. Yeah. They've like pasted like gray and red and all the colors, so it starts kind of like strobing behind him. And obviously that's 1985. There's no like trickery in that. It's all in camera. You can even kind of see like the sort of the cameraman like sort of is like sort of struggling to keep up with him at some points. And I'm sure that's probably like I don't know what they probably just shot that out of the car window. I'm not sure that there's any like dolly that can go that fast at that time, or it is before the days of cable cam and all that kind of stuff. So I just sort of think that's like, I mean, his movies are well worth seeing. There's not that many of them. I think there's like 6 total. And I highly recommend Holy Motors, his last film, which stars an older Dennis Lebon. But I just wanted to share that clip because it's one of my favorite bits of music and film.
And it's always good to hear David Bowie.
Yeah. So now we're going to see another clip from Scott Pilgrim. I remember there was a point when I was making the sequence where I really felt like I'd bitten off more than I could chew. I remember at one point just like... there's lots of things in this movie where like there's like lights going off within the movie. We sort of had this idea that every time there's like a connection, like a hit, like that there should be a light going off. So in a lot of the fight scenes, this isn't one of the fight scenes specifically, but we would have these light bulbs placed around the shot to go off in an order, and I would set them off by hand. You know, sometimes the choreographer would do it, but most of the time I would do it. And so I'd have this button, and I'd stand by the monitor, and I would be going, there were the real light bulbs. I think we used like 4,000 light bulbs during the making of the movie. And we would be like going, psh, 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 psh. And I'd have this button, and it just said Edgar. They gave it to me at the end. I had this button. It was just my light bulb button. And I remember at a point during this sequence, I remember even me and the AD and the director of photography, it was like, usually like there's always a sequence where like it's like 3/4 of the way through the shoot where everybody's exhausted, and it's before the kind of final rally where it's like everybody's tired. And I remember this is exactly where this scene landed. I'm very happy with the finished thing, but I remember like a point in like shooting it, like standing by the monitors with a wind machine going and pressing all these light bulb buttons. I was thinking, what the fuck am I doing? Like,
I think that every day.
And it's funny, Michael Cera said that for like a long time after the film, he had the sound of like light bulbs, like it would kind of like haunt his dreams. Obviously later on, but the amazing thing is they're all like digitally taken out. The actual light bulbs are all gone. But if you actually watch closely, especially in the final sequence with the sword fight and stuff, there's like sort of, every time that they connect, like a light goes off. And you can't really do that stuff digitally because, you know, it throws a light in a certain direction. So there's like shitloads of lighting cues in this sequence. And the other thing to say about this one, which is interesting, is this is like a battle between 2 bands. And the Japanese band is played by Cornelius, who, if you don't know that artist, who is one of my favorite artists, incredible guy. I just saw him live this summer, in fact. And
incredible live show, too.
And what's funny, like when Cornelius was being promoted over here by Matador, the easy thing they used to say is like, oh, Cornelius is like the Japanese Beck. So playing the part of Sex Bomb in this sequence is Beck. Right. So my thought with this sequence, it was like Beck versus Japanese Beck. Which is a joke, probably for an audience of 1, me.
No, I get it. I totally get it.
But what's funny is that I think Beck and Cornelius are friends, and in fact, Cornelius has done some remix of Beck's songs. But like, what's interesting is both of them did these songs completely separately, and they're both obviously done before the movie. And in fact, Cornelius and Beck, they both like recorded their songs. We had no footage. I just gave them storyboards. In Cornelius's case, I'd cut together the storyboards, and he did a sort of approximation. Beck, on the other hand, in Hancock Park in his garage, that's how we say in the UK.
It's called a recording studio.
He one weekend, he wanted to do the songs, and Nigel had worked with him, but he wanted to work off, I think he was working off an 8-track or something that he just had at home. And he said, give me the scenes, give me lots of artwork, give me sort of some rough guidelines of what the song needs to be, and let me have a go. So basically, like, we printed out large pieces of the artwork from the books. We gave him all the storyboards for the sequences on boards. I gave him a list of how many songs I needed. And over a weekend, at the end of the weekend, Nigel called me and said, oh, Beck's got something for us. And it was like a CDR with like 22 songs on it. And basically the songs were like done in a rough form. Maybe it's on a 4-track, actually. They're done in a rough form. He gave us versions without the vocals because the actors ended up singing on top, replacing his vocals. On the album, you can get the Beck versions too. But we never got him to re-record anything because they sounded so raw and garagey that it just seemed right. And even in the music that's in the opening credits was very difficult for the actors to mime along with because there were lots of fluffs on it. They were sort of just kind of jamming and improvising. But it sounded so real. It just sounded like we should use that and not get him to do any overdubs. And so what he did on his 4-track that weekend is what's in the movie, including this song.
That's cool.
Did you send him any Oscar Fissinger?
Any what, sorry?
Oscar Fissinger?
No, what's that?
I'm thinking of the opening of the movie that feels visually like that. Oscar Fissinger is one of my heroes.
Oh, like the scratch kind of art?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? That sequence actually is funny. That wasn't the original intention, the opening credits of the movie. We originally it had them playing that song, and then it said the title, and then it went into the movie, and they finished the song. But then it was actually weirdly enough, like, it was a suggestion by name drop alert, Quentin Tarantino. He said...
Who?
He said, he watched the movie and he said, you should have a title sequence at the start of this movie. He goes, just to let everybody settle and see the names of the people who are going to be in the movie and just let everybody get their heads around it for like 2 minutes. And I thought, that's an interesting idea. So we didn't have anything, but we did have this Beck demo. The thing that the Sex Pistols play in the opening credits, there was like 3 minutes of it. And it was fun. And so the only thing that we added with Nigel is that we got the actors to come in and like yell on top of the demo, like they were like jamming and trying to shout at each other whilst they were playing. But basically that demo is the opening titles of the movie. So that there's another artist, Norman something. What's the other guy who does the scratch art? Anybody? Was it Norman McLaren? That's the guy.
Thank you.
So the reference was Norman McLaren. Yeah, so Beck didn't see any of that until it was finished. So we never that idea for that sequence didn't exist until very late in the day. And then these amazing music video guys called Shinola who've done incredible videos. Right. I asked them to do the opening credits, and so we had that demo. But this is one of the latest sequences which features
Cornelius versus Beck.
Beck versus Japanese Beck.
Wow, it seems like there's a lot of Easter eggs in that movie.
Yeah, there's a Queen track in that scene. Can anybody name it? Flash Gordon. There's the sound of the ring is from Flash Gordon, and we had to clear.
You licensed that? You cleared that?
We licensed it.
I could make that on my phone right now.
I don't know. I think so. We just did it, and then it was just always funny to me that in the end credits it says, "Queen: The Hypnotic Seduction of Dale" is the name of the track. The other thing that's in there, a little Easter egg, is when the Japanese turn their dials up, that is the Japanese symbol for 11. It's very silly. The other thing I really remember about that is that, like, when we shot the whole scene, when we shot all the stuff for the actors and the Sato twins who played the Katinagi twins, then we had to do a day of, like, shooting plates for all the effect stuff. So we had to go back and shoot the crowds and one of my vivid memories of the movie, and especially when you stand at it like a remove, is watching the second AD explain the movie to the extras of what was happening in the scene. And he's going, so then you look up and there's 2 dragons, and then over here is like this electric yeti, and then they're fighting, so you're like, wow, and then they've killed the dragons and you cheer, and then the yeti disappears and you cheer again. And like I imagine the looks on the extras' faces trying to process all of that.
Just nod. Yep. I love that punk rock blows away EDM in that scene too.
Well, like I said, that was Beck's demo. So that was the demo he did in like Hancock
Which is
Park.
what punk rock is.
Yeah,
You
on
don't
a
like
4-track.
make demos for punk
No
rock.
overdubs.
You just make it.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Nice.
Oh, so the next one we already started talking. Goodfellas.
Goodfellas. 1990.
And this is a sequence. This isn't the whole of this sequence, but like, I mean, this is. I think Martin Scorsese is one of those directors who can use music just brilliantly, and I think this. He'd already been doing it in his career with, like, Mean Streets and The Color of Money and
The Last Waltz.
What? Sorry.
The Last
Waltz. Yeah.
I mean, he lived with Robbie Robertson.
And I think this is the movie where I think they, sort of, it's such an expansive soundtrack because the movie moves from 50s to 60s to 70s and, covers, like, hits from all of those sequences. But this is one of those sequences, we should just play it. I won't say which one it is because you'll know which one it is. But it's just one of those sequences where, like, it's so thrillingly edited and put together. And this isn't the whole sequence, but just some of it. And just genius use of music, and in a lot of cases, like him using music that either hadn't been used in films before, or making it the defining use of that song. There are some kind of songs that, like, I think Scorsese has just claimed as his own, and nobody else can use them.
Give Me Shelter.
Give Me Shelter. Layla.
He also would play music on set. He would play music on set, and I know that in this movie, which does take place over these, quite a few years, different decades, that he wanted to be sure that whatever he played could have existed in that time. So he was. This piece of music is from 1971, 72. The great Harry Nilsson. Doing "Jump Into the Fire."
It's amazing.
That was enough music budget for like the first 3 movies I did right there. So that was Harry Nilsson, and then we go into Memo from Turner. From Rolling
Mick Jagger
Stone,
from Performance.
with Ry Cooder on guitar.
And then later on in the sequence, it has I think it has 6 songs in total in that sequence: "Monkey Man" by the Stones, "Magic Bus" by the Who, "Manish Boy" by Muddy Waters, and there's another one as well that I've forgotten. But
Probably another Rolling Stone song.
what's the other one? It's George Harrison, "What Is Life?" Oh, yeah. And then they play like Harry Nilsson again at the end. I mean, I remember watching that film. I think it was like the first film I saw it when I was 16. I think it was an 18 in the UK, so I was sneaking in. But I went back to see it the next night because I was just so bowled over by the technique, And I think his use of music and the editing. I mean, what's great in that sequence, obviously, he's like coked out and it's all paranoid, but it's still taking place in the course of a day. So it makes a sort of a choice that you don't really. I mean, it's the first time I think I'd ever seen that in a movie. The idea of like, well, if this is taking place in the course of a day, there's 6 songs to show you the passing of time, to show the montage, rather than have one song that carries all the way through. There is a funny link with Shaun of the Dead. Goodfellas and Shaun of the Dead have the same camera operator. Actually, no, the camera operator, the camera operator on Goodfellas was the DP and main camera operator on Shaun of the Dead. And one of the funny things is that, this guy's name is David Dunlap. And one of the funny things is all the way through the shoot, he was the operator on Goodfellas. So he'd shot all of that sequence you just saw. He's not a steady cam operator, though. So all the way through the shoot, people would say, "Oh my God, you shot Goodfellas. Tell us about doing the shot in the kitchen when they go through the kitchen." David would say, "I didn't do that. That was Larry Edmonds, but I did everything else." And they go, "Oh, but that kitchen shot, man." Then, just to haunt David Dunlap again, with Shaun of the Dead, people say, "You did Shaun of the Dead. What about that Steadicam shot when he goes to the store and back?" And he goes, "I didn't shoot that one. That was Chris Edwards, but I did everything else." So I feel like David Dunlap is constantly haunted by these amazing. I mean, still incredible to have done the rest of Goodfellas, obviously, but he did both movies. But that was something. I mean, and I think actually this leads us into, something like that, like sort of both like a lot of directors whose use of music that I love, like Scorsese, Tarantino, Steven Soderbergh, like sort of that definitely, Walter Hill as well, like that definitely kind of plays into sort of Baby Driver, which is sort of like the kind of culmination of loving movies like Goodfellas, and also the use of music in them as well. So in a way, like, sort of as I was, something like Goodfellas that has so much music in it, where it's like, it's usually playing a score. Sometimes it's happening within the scene, or you get the sense that it's playing like in a club or a wedding or in a bar. And I think the sort of the idea that I had for Baby Driver is that to sort of do a soundtrack like that, but to have it entirely diegetic, and also to have the main character playing the music. So most of the music in the film, the lead character has actually chosen it. And then a lot of times in the movie, you're listening to what he's listening to. So you're seeing the movie through his eyes and hearing the movie through his ears.
And he has pretty good taste.
Yes. I mean, a lot of these are obviously things that I like. I mean, if you're going to make a movie and you're going to listen to these songs hundreds of times, you better love the song. You know, so...
a good song is always a good song, I think.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, is that in the movie, there are no songs that I tire of because I love all the songs. And, you know...
And I think there's about 44... there's a lot of songs.
I think it's like maybe like 35 like commercial tracks, which is a lot. And, you know, and we had to also kind of clear them before we started shooting. You know, much like... So it was like doing the Queen scene 35 times over. And every scene, so in the scene which is the opening of the movie, which we're about to watch part of, you know, it's so in a scene like this, it is exactly like that, where sometimes Ansel's listening to it in his ears. A lot of times in this sequence, because there's no dialogue, it was one of the few sequences where we could just play it out loud. So in a lot of these scenes in the street, we're just playing this song, you know, full volume, because the other actors are also like doing stuff in time with the music. But this is the thing, like this song that opens this movie by the John Spencer Blues Explosion is the song that I heard when I was 21. And what's the start, the germ of the idea for the movie was because when I listened to this song, I would start imagining this car chase. And, you know, I was 21 years old, so it wasn't like I necessarily like sort of was thinking this would be a great scene in something. I started to think that, but it was more that when I listened to the song, I couldn't think of anything else. So I would always start visualizing this car chase. So it was like having like action movie synesthesia. Is I sort of had this vision of this thing, and you know, like the Min Royale video that we saw earlier was like the sort of the start of a dry run for it. But this kind of has like, you know, what happens next. So it was like a real thrill to have, and in the time, I think after Shaun of the Dead, I met John Spencer from the Blues Explosion, and we became friends, and I sort of told him, I didn't want to jinx it for myself, in terms of if I said, I've got this idea for a movie, and I really want to use Bellbottoms, and I'm sure John thought, yeah, but then, you know, cut to like this summer, John Spencer is actually in the movie as well. Ah. Like he is in the final scene of the movie and sort of has one of the final lines of the movie. If you haven't seen it, I'm not going to spoil the end scene. But like the idea I thought was it'd be funny if John Spencer was the first and last voice you hear in Baby Driver. Oh, yeah. Great. So anyway, well, let's watch this scene.
Bellbottoms, John Spencer Blues Explosion, 1994. Oh boy. I love car chases.
They're as exhausting to make as they are exciting to watch. Oh.
I remember seeing, and this really affected me as a kid, I saw Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry in the drive-in as a kid in the back of my parents' car. Whew, never been the same.
It's an incredible movie. Also a British director doing an American car chase movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah. John Huff.
And James Garner did a bunch of the stunts. Okay, music in film. Did you add some... I don't remember the strings being in that track.
There are strings in Bellbottoms, but we do actually like add to the start of it. That was one of the things that was really... That's what I mean in the beginning. Yeah. So there are strings in that song, and one of the things that was great, I have an amazing... Steve Price, who is the composer on this film, he is somebody that... when I first started thinking about the script, like 10 years ago, he was a music editor. And I met him. I said, is there a good music editor? I asked our music supervisor, and he said, there's this guy called Steve Price. You should meet him. So I got him to break down the tracks for me. And I had 10 of the tracks worked out, like Bellbottoms, Hocus Pocus, Tequila, like The Damned, like Brighton Rock, a lot of the big set pieces in the movie. And he did these like sort of, basically like charts, much more detailed versions of like intro, verse 1, verse 2, you know, middle 8, but just a lot more detailed. And it was really helpful, and I incorporated it a lot into the script. The other thing with Steve is that then the next time I wrote with him, he was like the music editor and arranger on Scott Pilgrim. The next thing he did was he was one of the composers on a film I produced called Attack the Block. And the next thing he did is he composed Gravity and won the Oscar. Only with his second score, which is astonishing. I did The World's End with him. But when it came to this, there's only really half an hour of score in Baby Driver. But I called Steve, even though he's a big-time Oscar winner now, and said, you have first refusal because you were there right at the start. And he goes, oh, of course I want to do it. And the great thing about Steve, and this isn't the case with probably in direct contrast to say Alex North, being bumped off, his score being bumped off by all the temp music. The great thing about Steve is that he knows what the movie is. He knows about the songs. And a lot of his score in the movie is in leading into the same key as the
Connective
song.
tissue. Yeah,
yes.
I noticed there's a lot of handoffs between. Yeah.
And that's great. And not all composers would do that because some of them have too much ego to kind of really think about what the other stuff is. The great thing about Steve is that there are several bits in Baby Driver where the score starts to come in during a song or in the middle of a song. At the opening of Baby Driver itself, is it sort of starts with the sort of tinnitus. Starts on the Sony bing at the start and then builds and builds and builds and turns into strings. And then Bellbottoms starts and his strings keep going until the strings in Bellbottoms starts. So that's a great example of the song and the score and the sound design all going together. And, so there's places in the movie where a song that you know already suddenly sort of has this kind of, in Hocus Pocus we do it as well, where there's a part in the middle of the song where sort of an orchestra is sort of playing at the same time, in the same key, sort of bolstering parts of the song.
And also, this film in general is incredibly rhythmic. There's so many sequences that are glued to the music. So you clearly were doing your homework before and afterwards.
Yeah,
very rhythmic.
All of the songs were written into the script. Pretty much every day on the set was like shooting the Queen scene in Shaun of the Dead. We always had every possible way of doing playback. So in some cases, only Ansel can hear it, and maybe the camera operator and me. In some cases, everybody can hear it. So, obviously at the start of that sequence when John Hamm and John Bernthal and Asa Gonzalez are getting out of the car, they can all hear the track. And on top of the track as well, the choreographer is counting on top. Right. That little shot at the end is much more deceptive. It's much more complicated than it might seem. When they get out of, Ansel pulls up, they get out of one car, they all open their doors at the same time, they all close their doors at the same time, they all switch places, Asa switches costumes, they all get into the final car, close the doors on time, drive off, and then she drives off, all in one shot. And if you watch the scene again, it's pretty much it's almost a 360, and the crew are all hiding behind pillars and other cars. Because there's nowhere to hide. Because we basically, as the camera operator pans around, and me and the choreographer, Ryan, would be running around the camera, and because it's the car's noisy and stuff, that's a case where he's going 5, 6, 7, 8, shouting that on top. Yeah. So that's a case of they're doing it to the music, but I think after a couple of rehearsals, they then just do it to the counts. Because with the car stuff, the car, especially when on the freeway, forget trying to listen to John Spencer. So some of those times is you have to kind of do it with counts or create those moments later. But everything up until that, the music is playing full blast, and so it was one of those sequences where it was I think it probably in total. It must be something like 10 days shoot over a long period of time. We'd keep coming back to it. And poor John Bernthal, who's only in the first kind of couple of the scenes of the movie, was the one actor who kept having to come back to Atlanta, to come back and do a day of frowning in a car and then go back to Ojai. He was totally fine with it though. I remember he said a funny thing to me that was really stuck with me. Because I think all of the other actors were there for the whole time, but John Bernthal was the one actor I felt like I needed to apologize to him because I think he was supposed to come back and forth, but then we needed to do extra stuff on the scene, and so he came back an extra 3 times. So in total on the movie, he flew to Atlanta maybe 8 or 9 times or something. And I said to him at the end, on the last day, I said, "Hey John, I just want to say thanks for your patience. These scenes are really sort of meticulous and difficult to do." And John Bernthal said, he goes, "Listen, man, if this shit was easy, every asshole would do it." And I thought those are words to live by. by the great philosopher John Bernthal. I mean, he's not wrong. It was something it really stuck with me. He just said it, and it really stuck with me. If this shit was easy, every asshole would do it. Speaking of which.
Speaking of
Meticulous and tricky.
Yeah, we got 2 more clips here, and then we can get some questions if we move fast enough.
And this is the last clip.
It's
by
a music
somebody else.
video. Michelle Gondry's Chemical Brothers video for the song Star Guitar, which is a fantastic... this came out in 2002, and it was mostly all shot on a TGV train. And I've taken those trains. Michel's from France, so he's taken them more than me, but I've taken those trains many, many times just listening to music, and it's one of the best music videos you'll ever see, is just your own, just sitting on the train, and everything, because they go over 200 miles an hour.
Yeah.
You're just sitting there, it's like, everything becomes locked to the rhythm here, and it's had a big effect on me as a musician. Just those rides, but Michelle nailed it with this video.
Yeah.
It's really kind of an incredible work.
I think it's such a deceptively simple video. I remember the first time I saw it, I was like sitting, I think it was a production company that I was working with for music videos, and I was watching it through the TV. I was watching it on a TV through a piece of glass. So I was like watching it through a window and without the sound, and I was looking at this video thinking, what the fuck is that? Because it was just like it's just like a train shot, and then obviously you hear it and say, oh, this is genius. I mean, there's elements of that even factored into the clip we just saw. Sure. Because
it's all very rhythmic.
Yeah, and there are a couple of places where almost everything is in camera, and then there are some clever cheats, right at the end of Bellbottoms when they pull into that car park. On those little bass riffs, you see these concrete pillars go through shot.
Right.
2 of them are real, and 2 of them are not real. And it's you've got one that lands on the music, and then we say, this one's on the music, put one in there, and put one in there. And it's literally you're putting on the beat. Right. If you see, if you got the Michelle Gondry, they did those amazing, I think it's Palm Pictures did those best of Michelle Gondry music videos. They have the making of, and one of the things he did is he took the track and basically notated where the beats were, and then worked it out initially with oranges and dominoes, putting them on the kind of the ground.
And Michelle plays drums. I mean, he is a drummer, so he's got that.
So this is made up of video through a train window in France, but it's obviously then computer generated loops, but it's still just incredible. And it's one of those things where, it's a lot of his videos I love. Another one that does a similar thing that I really love is his Daft Punk video for Around the World, which also does a similar thing.
Which is a similar thing.
It's amazing. Anyway, this is a hypnotic and incredible video.
And this also features a sample by David Bowie from Starman.
A truly hypnotic video. We just got one last clip, I think.
Yeah, but we're behind, so it's
okay. So this is actually the sequence that immediately follows the last one you saw in Baby Driver. This is the opening credit sequence, and a couple of interesting things about this. If you haven't seen it before, if you've seen it for the second time, most of you probably know this, but keep a close eye on what's written all over the walls and all over the place during the opening sequence. The other thing that's interesting about this, it's all in one shot. And it's a Steadicam shot, so it's all in one shot. And we did it on the first day of the shoot. And it's a 2-minute, 45-second shot. And in the course of a day, I think we did 2 half-day rehearsals on set. We rehearsed a lot with Ansel, and then with the kind of the extras and everything and other people, we did 2 half-day rehearsals. On the Blu-ray, actually, there's a great, funny dress rehearsal on video, which is worth watching. On the day, a 10-hour shooting day, we shot 28 takes of this. And this is take 21. Shot in 35mm. Our amazing operator, a guy called Roberto DeAngelis, it was his first day on the shoot. And so during the course of this day, I think we worked out that he walked 50 city blocks by the end of the day. So poor Roberto got a real workout. But, and the other thing that's crazy about this is that I had got the song, and this is years before. There was a British DJ, there is a British DJ, his name is Mark Nicholson, Ozzy Misu. And he's one of those guys who came around in 2000, one of those mashup guys. And he's really talented, and he's great at combining sort of different samples into his like music. So way back when I first started writing this, I made this mix of of Harlem Shuffle, where I gave him notes and we basically put in sound effects all the way through the song, including like Baby talking to a barista. And what's funny is that we basically use that as the guideline for the choreography all the way through, even to the point where at one point there's the sound of somebody using an ATM. And we had it on the track in a certain place, and I just got used to it. You know, like, or another bit where he bumps into somebody and they say, hey, you know, look out. But it's funny with the ATM is like we had this sound there, so when we were working out the song, I could sort of, you know, we were timing it out and following Ansel, and by the track, I could say to the production designer, that's where the ATM goes. Like, that's where the sound is, that's the way that goes. So you could sort of work out where things were. One of the other crazy things about working out this sequence is that we had to find a location where we could get to a coffee shop for the chorus. Right. You know, so literally...
You can do that in Silver Lake really easily.
But what the weird thing you'd have to do is that we started by like finding like, what door do we like? Oh, this is a cool door. Let's use this door. Okay, let's play the song and let's see where we can get to by the time that chorus comes in. So it's kind of a crazy thing to witness is like on my iPhone playing Harlem Shuffle and seeing how far I could get.
Walking in beat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it also, like, on top of that, then Bill Pope, my cinematographer, would say, like, remember Ansel has longer legs. Like, so it was a sort of weird thing is like, the door that opens this shot, the building that opens the shot, every possible direction away from that and round the corner, we looked at everything to see where we could get to at this point, and then whether he could get back in time for the end of the track. Because it isn't one of those tracks where you can really extend it. So it's like one of those things where you're completely like a slave to the song at some point. Is like, this is where it starts. He needs to get to here, and then when he goes back, he needs to go back quicker because you've got less song on the tail end. So
you didn't edit the song at all?
No, the song is the song, and you know it's one of those songs where you can't really, you could do an edit with a dance track or something, or like, but you can't really do an edit with this without people noticing. So the song is the song, and that's it. Yeah. But the other thing that was in it as well is that we, with the earwigs, and you'll hear like there's several people in the shot who were talking, and those people could hear the track as well. So they're sort of like speaking in time with the track. And so as well as when you had the sound mix, not only did we have sounds of the street and all these wild tracks, but we had all these people talking for the entire thing. So you can sort of hear, especially when you hear it in like sort of the best kind of stereo, you can hear these bits of conversations coming in and out, but those people were like speaking for the entire track. And then they would sort of be speaking on beats, so they're sort of getting little, I don't know if you've ever done that thing where, you know, you make music out of people's words. You know, some of these guys do that amazingly, like Kid Koala and Ozzy Misu, like sort of can take people's talking and make music out of it. So we're sort of doing that the other way around. So these are all things that came into the creation of this shot.
And do you know what the tempo is of the Harlem Shuffle?
That is a very good question.
I'm gonna check during the...
Okay, well let's watch it and then we'll come back to it.
Yeah, it's about 120 beats per minute, which I think most people tend to talk at that cadence.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of experimenting in my scores and my work with that, and 120, we all kind of talk like that.
Yeah. Well, it's a good thing to get them, that sort of those people, the key sort of people who like sort of come into the earshot. You know, we just got them to kind of like keep doing it, and then, you know, so some of them were like sort of that guy goes, be on time. Like he's just kind of like sort of talking and improvising, but just kind of like hitting the beats.
Yeah, it's a very rhythmic movie, and I can very much appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. Okay, that's...
We've got a little time left. If anyone wants to come up and ask a question, there are microphones on either side of the stage. 'Cause, you know, you and I could go on off forever. Okay, welcome.
Cool, awesome. Hi, Edgar. Big fan. Question, I was listening to you on a podcast actually a couple days ago where you were talking about that as you were writing the movie, your then girlfriend, you wrote it in spurts and you gave it to her to kind of feedback, you know, like how does that sound? And I was wondering, because I do it too with my partner sometimes where it's like, oh, what does this sound? And I write to music all the time too. Have you ever gotten that response of like, oh, this scene is good. I don't know about the song though. And like, is there any difference between that response that you get from someone that you have an emotional connection with on like that relationship versus like if you give it to like Ryan Johnson or like Tarantino or someone and they were like, oh, what about this song?
I don't, in that particular case, I'm not sure that necessarily when they read scenes that the song, I'm not sure if I gave over the song as well. I think once I was done with the script, when we gave it to the actors, we gave them this like special like iPad. We made this kind of app where the song was like baked into the script, so you could push a button and the song would start. And so it was a really good thing to get this cast on board because people could sort of like hear the film and understand it. But I think maybe some things changed in a couple of places, but not too much of it actually.
Okay, cool, awesome.
Switching sides.
Hi. So it's always hard to get license for music. Is there anything that you've tried really hard to get license for music and they just rejected you? And then what scene would it have been for?
Well, usually I think over time, like usually there's things where there's like the only things that really dropped out of this, and this has also been the case with some like previous movies, is sometimes like hip hop or dance tracks that like haven't cleared any of their samples. Like you might be able to buy them commercially, but when it comes to being in a movie, the label gets all kind of jittery and stuff. Like there was one like Atlanta hip hop track that I wanted to use in Baby Driver by like Sci-Hi the Prince, and it sampled like the Atlanta Braves. And it was like the perfect track for this bit. But it was on a mixtape, so they had never released it commercially, and therefore they had never cleared any of it. And they weren't about to start. And even though we even offered to sort of try and clear it for them, they were like, this is more trouble than it's worth. So sometimes there are things that just... There are things, obviously, there are bands that are like prohibitively expensive. Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, Fleetwood Mac is supposed to be very expensive. Sometimes it's like songs that are just unclearable. There was another song in Baby Driver I wanted to use by the Herbalizer, which was using this kind of like dialogue from an old film. But the song also featured samples from Star Wars and stuff. So it was just like a complete no-no. And I got in touch with the Herbalizer and said, well, where is this dialogue from? And it was from like some old like radio bloopers. So we tried to track that down. But sometimes those things are like sort of... a lot of people who do like mashup stuff or like even kind of like hip hop from the late 80s, early 90s, like those things are like not really licensed properly and unusable.
And sometimes there's a publishing dispute between the different writers as to who has what percent. Hip hop is notorious for that. It's crazy.
There was one thing on Baby Driver. It cleared very late, but there was a song by the not Detroit Cobras, the Detroit Emeralds, where all of the writers were dead, and it was tricky getting in touch with their estates. And we finally got it cleared just before we started shooting. But so you get into problems like that. It's usually the tracks that you don't think would be a problem become problems. And you're smart enough to like not write, if you're making your first movie, don't write the Beatles and Led Zeppelin into your script, because that's not going to happen.
Okay, thank you. Your turn? Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Tal. What is the best advice you have for things? Yeah.
Lemmy. That's Lemmy style.
Okay. Hi, I'm Taryn. What's the best advice you have for young aspiring filmmakers?
I think you just got to sort of basically like got to cling on to, just go with your gut, and you got to cling on to what you really want to do. I think, especially at that stage, is that if you've like sort of lost kind of sight of your style or your intent, that's like is not good, and it never feels good. So I think, especially if you're doing something for nothing, and you're making your first movie, and you can make your first movie for nothing, and my movie cost absolutely zero, it's probably one of the last times you are going to be your own boss. So you should make sure that it is at least a fraction of what you actually want to do. You don't want to make the first thing that you make something that's like not yours at all, and you end up disowning. So I think sticking to your guns and going with your gut is really important, and never forgetting that.
Thanks.
Baby Driver is not the first movie that you've used the John Spencer Blues Explosion for. I was wondering, at what point did he come on for his track in Hot Fuzz?
Yes, he does. Although weirdly enough, he is not credited as the John Spencer Blues Explosion in Hot Fuzz. I think it was like John Spencer on his own. It's called something like John Spencer and the Elegant Two. So it was John Spencer. By that point, he does the end. He does the end credits music for Hot Fuzz, and also in all of the mugshot sequences, you hear John Spencer. He composed a special song for the film called "Straight Out of Sanford," which made me laugh. And what's funny on the TV version, all of those bits with the mugshots are all cut out of the movie. And I was always, when I saw a terrible TV version, I said, I wonder why they cut all those bits out. And then I realized it's because John Spencer is going, "Here come the motherfucking fuzz." Like, so those bits are missing from the network versions. But it was because I'd become friendly with him at that point, and I thought, I was a big John Spencer fan, I thought it'd be really funny to get him to do a song for the movie. And I remember getting the song back. The movie came out in February, and I think we got the movie at Christmas. And my brother is also a big fan. So I remember that Christmas, before it came out, we were listening to that song and laughing. Just couldn't believe that we had this John Spencer track for Hot Fuzz. Talking about the movie as well, which is equally funny.
Hi. I heard a story for Baby Driver. You interviewed a actual car thief or drag racer who was actually arrested in it. But did you visit him in prison, or was that a true story?
No, it's true. He was out. I interviewed a number of ex-bank robbers and ex-getaway drivers, all of whom had done their time and were some of these people you can find through rehabilitation programs, and some people have written books. There was a particularly great guy called Joe Lawyer who is in the movie as a security guard, and he had written. He in the 80s and 90s he had committed 30 bank robberies, and then people say, how do you meet somebody like that? I say, well, he's actually represented by CAA for his for his writing. But he was amazing, and he introduced me to some other people. So a lot of things in the movie that I'd asked him about. I'd already got the story of the movie. He'd also written, this guy Joe Lloyd had written this great article called "Soundtracking a Bank Robbery," where he didn't do the same thing as Baby, but he used to have a thing of playing a victory song once he knew he got away. And in fact, something that Jamie Foxx says in the movie is exactly what Joe Lawyer said. I asked him, I said, would you ever play music on the way to a job? And he said, oh, not on the way to a job, because I've got enough demons up here making music. And I was like, oh, boy. Write that one down, I'll have that. But his thing, this is true, one of his songs that he would play when he was getting away from a bank robbery would be Smooth Criminal by Michael Jackson.
Not We Are the Champions?
No.
That's what I would play.
Thank you.
Hi, long-time fan. I used to read your MySpace blog. So how do you... Yes. How do you come to collaborate with Run the Jewels for Baby Driver?
How did I meet Run the Jewels? I think that was probably through Danger Mouse, Brian Burton, who did... who saw the movie early and wanted to release the album on his label, 30th Century Records, which is part of Columbia. And then we used the Run the Jewels track in the movie. I was a big fan of them, and we used the Run the Jewels track. And then Brian had the idea of doing. It's not a song that's in the movie, but it was one that's on the album that samples Bellbottoms. That was totally Brian Burton's idea, Danger Mouse. And he actually sort of presented me with it. He goes, I've got this idea, I'm just going to play it to you. And so he'd done a remix of Bellbottoms. And he said, I think I could get Run the Jewels and Big Boy to rap over this. I'm like, great. And so the movie was already done by this point, so there was nowhere really for it to go in the movie, but we put it on the album because it's sampling Bellbottoms. But that was great. So I got to spend a day in Atlanta with Killer Mike and the real LP, and they're so funny and amazing. So, and Big Boy as well. It was incredible. Actually, Big Boy and Killer Mike are also in the movie. I think though, when we came to do the song for the movie, Killer Mike had forgotten that he was in the movie, and then he put two and two together way later. He goes, yeah, I'm in this movie with Big Boy at the bar with Killer Mike. It took him a second. I think he actually sort of he did put two and two together until we were actually sort of looking at clips from the film, and then he remembered. He goes, oh yeah, he'd completely forgotten the one night that he came down to the set, and him and Big Boy and Killer Mike are standing with Kevin Spacey at the bar in the restaurant. Those are the two guys that are chatting to him at the bar. Atlanta royalty.
Hey, so if Baby Driver is kind of as close to like a musical as you've gotten, but would you be interested in doing an actual musical film? And if so, like what kind? Like jukebox, like original, something?
Yeah, I would. I mean, if it was the right thing, I think it's about finding the right thing and something that hasn't been done before, or like, if you're going to redo something, then there better be a good reason to redo it or a good take. But, as evidenced by some of the clips, I love that stuff, To me, the idea of doing, I don't know how you would do a modern Busby Berkeley, but if there was a way of doing something like that, I'd love to do something like that. It'd be great.
Hi, Edgar, big fan. Watching the Cornetto trilogy back-to-back in theaters was the single greatest drunken experience ever. But from an aspiring filmmaker, you're truly inspiration. And if I could steer the topic to something just as important as music, to what makes a film the story, and you are such a good storyteller, maybe Ant-Man would have been a great film. And I just wanted to ask, do you, in that preliminary stages of brainstorming for when you're coming up with your stories, do you still follow that method that you and Simon were showing in that one video, where you're?
Yeah. So I think you're talking about when we do the flip chart stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think when we did Shaun of the Dead, we'd do this thing where we'd just basically have a flip chart and we'd write like a scene on a page, and then sort of. I sort of do a similar thing. And with Baby Driver, I sort of use that thing where, like the 40 index cards thing, where it's like, which I think is the old David Lynch thing. He used to say like 40 postcards is a movie, and it's like 10 not that David Lynch necessarily thinks too much about the 3-act structure, but 10 cards for Act 1, 20 cards for Act 2, 10 cards for Act 3. And the thing with Baby Driver is I really thought about it in terms of like one song per scene. Now, obviously, there are some scenes in Baby Driver that don't have music deliberately, but pretty much there's 35 songs in that movie, so it's pretty much like, a song per card and what's happening in the scene. So it is sort of like how I wrote the film is that I would I wouldn't write a scene unless I had the right song. Before I started, I had like 10 of them figured out. And then when I came to a scene where I didn't know what the song was yet, I would find the song before I continued writing. And so by the end of the first draft, I had this playlist, and it was 90% of what's in the movie. Right. So that was like a way that I did it, but it was sort of like using that kind of Sid Field index cards thing and the 3-act structure, but linking them to songs, sort of and that's pretty much, weirdly enough, I still have the postcards on my wall, sort of from the writing. Even in my sort of room in my house that I write in, there's still sort of post-it notes of the 2 or 3 scenes that I cut out at the bottom of the board. It's funny, I just left the post-it notes up there. But that's pretty much how I did it. So it's sort of similar to the flip chart thing. But I think the thing with the flip chart is it's a good thing to do with a co-writer, because you're sort of just brainstorming on every page or about the characters, and it's a good kind of Bible. It means when you're writing together, when we write together, you might do a thing where it's I'll do this scene, you do that scene, and then you rewrite each other's scenes. And so you've always got this thing on the wall as the map. When you're writing on your own, you could be a bit more focused. So when I was writing on my own, and I had these cards up on the wall, and that was my roadmap.
Yeah, you and Simon just were all over the place with that. Thank you. I look forward to all your future projects.
Thank you.
Hi. Oh, are we on? Okay, there we go. So your films are so incredibly detail-oriented, and that last clip was a perfect example with the lyrics being matched and all the graffiti and everything. So my question is, how do you come up with ideas for things that obviously have to be planned out beforehand? And how long does it take to really flesh out those details from a practical standpoint? Because all of those signs have to be made, and all of the art department has to do all that stuff.
Well, that sequence is a good example, because some of that work was done in 2008, and some of it was done this year. So how I started with that sequence is that I had the song, and then I worked out what I wanted to happen in the song and where, which is pretty much what you do with a music video. It's this is basically the map, literally that Michel Gondry thing. He literally laid it out on the floor what it was going to be. Yeah, he scored it. this is a similar thing. It was like, so I listen to the track and I write down, like, this is happening here. Then he crosses the road. Then he goes into the coffee shop. Then he comes back. Oh, there's a police car. So I kind of work those things out. Then I got this DJ to do a sound effects mix for me. So that was the thing that then, so I could play it to people and they could hear it and sort of say, oh, I understand. Then, you know, you're finding that location, like I said. You know, you're working out the bits with the other actors, even getting like the people who are like, there are dancers and then there are extras that kind of cost less. Dancers cost a bit more. And then there are people that talk. So anybody that talks in the thing, you audition them, you get them to kind of like do it in time in the music. Even like finding little things like you notice in the thing, there's like a trumpet player who at the start of the track, when you see him the first time, he's walking along with his trumpet in his box. And at the end of the song, he's like playing. So all of these things are building up in the sort of rehearsal period, go through with the choreographer, with the ADs. And then actually the graffiti is the thing that comes in last, because I wanted to do more graffiti, but most of the buildings wouldn't let us spray on them. Like the building on the other side of the street that he goes past is one of the courthouses in Atlanta. And they were pissed off about us filming outside, but absolutely we could not do any graffiti. So I'd seen this VFX reel. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie called A Most Violent Year with Oscar Isaac, which takes place in the 1980. There's a scene in that where they're on the subway. It's a big, long subway chase, and the subway car is covered with graffiti. And then they showed on the internet the before and after. All of that graffiti was digital. And I was like, I'd seen the movie. I was like, no fucking way. That's amazing. So all of the graffiti in that shot is digital. Because some of the bits are real. A couple of the bits are real. But as you notice, like, we had to put graffiti on buildings that wouldn't let us put graffiti on. So if they're watching that back courthouse, haha. We got you. And the other thing is, if you watch it, like, the graffiti changes when he goes back. Like, there's fresh graffiti on top of the other bits. So when he walks the first time, is the lyrics for the first part of the song. When he walks back, there's like extra lyrics on top of those lyrics, as if whilst he was in the coffee shop, that graffiti artist came along and just did it again. So right at the end of the shot, the last lyric in the song is "One More Time," and that's on the glass door, but that is not on the glass door at the start of the shot. So it's basically the whole shot is all real, like it's all real choreography, all the extras are real, the car is real, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's just those, you know, even that the building at the start is like 5 floors, but we digitally made it look like it went into infinity. So that first shot where you're looking up is like you can't see the top of the building. So it's like taking real photography and not dissimilar to like the Stargate Michel Gondry thing, like augmenting it. So that's how it's done. So that's a process of like thinking of ideas literally like 10 years ago and then adding to that idea like this year whilst we're editing it.
So yes, it's very detailed.
Yeah. Thank you.
I didn't know that about A Most Violent Year. That's crazy. Yeah. But
you can find the before and after thing on the internet. It's astonishing.
For the "Don't Stop Me Now" sequence, you said that the stunt coordinator kind of just stepped back, let you do your thing. But for something like Baby Driver, where it's like that, but on a much larger scale, nearly every scene, how do you kind of divvy up the responsibility between you, the stunt coordinator, and the choreographer?
Well, that was a great thing. I'd say starting with on Scott Pilgrim, like Brad Allen, who's amazing, who did Scott Pilgrim, and you worked with Jackie Chan, and more recently did like Kingsman and stuff. He's amazing, and he really believed in that himself. So kind of he was all in with like the dance element to it. I mean, some of the things in Scott Pilgrim are sort of dance stuff. The whole thing with Mae Whitman and the razor belt is basically like rhythmic gymnastics. You know, like she's doing like exactly that kind of routine, but with this like sharp weapon. On Baby Driver, Darren Prescott was the main stunt coordinator and second unit director. And like, it's one of my sort of favorite things about doing the movies is that you bring these disparate departments together. Ryan Heffington, whose studio, The Sweatshop, is just down the street on Sunset. Like, he's the guy who did the Chandelier video for Sia. He was the choreographer on this. And like, those guys got on like a house on fire. And those are the great experiences on a movie like Scott Pilgrim or this, is that when those two departments learn something from each other. And, you know, stunts turn into choreography, and choreography turns into stunts. And that's where you get something interesting. You know, in a lot of other movies, like, sort of the departments are all working in isolation and not communicating, and you don't necessarily get cohesive results. But in this case, it was a great kind of, like, partnership.
Thank you.
First, I wanted to thank you for signing my iPod at Amoeba the other day. So when you have that one
It's
song,
gone up or down in value.
yeah, thank you though. But when you have that one song that you want to use, or that one shot, like the opening scene of Baby Driver, how do you bring yourself to practicing that on a smaller scale like you did on the music video, or just bringing that out into the world? Because that's an idea you want, obviously. But how do you bring yourself to release that on not necessarily in the form you want in the first place, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar thing. Like, there's a good thing on. I wish I had the clip now, but it's on the Blu-ray. There's a dress rehearsal for that shot, the Harlem Shuffle shot, and it's really funny to watch because it's basically exactly the same shot, same camera operator, but with everybody not wearing their costumes, and just see people like working it out, and you can just see, you know, the sort of the mechanics of it basically. So that's not dissimilar to like, you know, doing a short film or doing like a low-budget dry run for something. Like, if you want to do something in your first film that's quite ambitious, you probably should try it out in a different form first. So that's when I was doing music videos. I'd always be like, basically like engineering the music video itself to be an experiment for something else.
It's your test kitchen.
Yeah, totally. And it's like sort of, you know, back then it was something you could do, especially when you have these artists who don't want to be in the videos. You know, they're not like they don't want to be on camera. So then you've got like a perfect chance to do like a short. So music videos is a good testing ground for just technique. It's like, if you've never used a piece of equipment before, try it out on something, you know. I mean, you don't want to be doing something ambitious, like, you don't want to be doing it on your first film for the first time ever, and then something goes wrong and you could have anticipated the mistakes if you'd done a trial run. So that's a lot of the things on Baby Driver, as I've been working up to doing them for a long time. Even like, I've done bits of car stuff in Hot Fuzz and Shaun and The World's End. Nothing to the extent of Baby Driver, but at least I knew what it was basically going to be like and how hard it was going to be. I think if Baby Driver had been my first car chase stuff, and you know, sort of, that was the first time I realized how hard car chases are, I probably would have got very quickly dissuaded. But I knew what was going to go into it, and I knew it was going to be worth it.
Thank you.
So I have a pretty specific question, because I actually just finished shooting my first feature at the beginning of this year. And as of right now, Google is our legal department. And so you kind of touched on this with that opening sequence of Baby Driver, where you took an existing track and you guys added to it. But have you ever found yourself in a situation where the original track doesn't really fit the film, but you decide to create like an homage to it, and walking that line between when it becomes a new original track again?
Yeah, I think sort of, I mean, I think in score that happens quite a lot, where you're sort of doing a sort of homage. Mm-hmm. You know, like sort of in Shaun of the Dead, the score is kind of very much like a homage to John Carpenter.
Yeah.
But it's not exactly the same like notes, but it's definitely in his style, and it's clearly like a pastiche. So I think that's always a good way to go, especially if you don't have the money. I mean, one thing I'd always say is that if you're doing your first film or even doing a short, don't like tempt with something that you couldn't afford. Mm-hmm. You see when you're like at art college, people do like shorts and they slap John Williams on it, and it's like, you're going to be disappointed, because you never be able to afford John Williams, and even if somebody composes the music for it, it's not going to sound like John Williams. Yeah. So my thought with Shaun of the Dead was like, we tempt the movie with music that we thought we could afford. So it was like John Carpenter and Goblin, and that stuff that I thought we could do something like that, because that's exactly how those guys did it. And I think that's the thing, is I think pastiche is fine. I think if you get into something where you're in like copyright breach is difficult.
Like, we got really lucky. Our producer matched with a composer on Tinder, and so she's been working with us for free. And actually the person,
I don't know if I want to hear the rest of the story.
You should be on
the person
stage.
we're paying homage to is actually one of the first clips you showed. It's Ennio Morricone, and so.
Your producer matched with Ennio Morricone on Tinder.
Yes, he did. He matched with the legend. Yes.
He's like 88.
Yeah.
I think the thing is with those things is that you can. I think sort of doing pastiche is fine. Mm-hmm. I mean, plenty of scores do that. John Carpenter doing the Halloween score was trying to rip off the score to Suspiria. And it doesn't really sound anything like it, but that was his attempt. He sort of thought, I could do something like that, and for cheap, and do it on my synth. And then he creates another iconic soundtrack. Mm-hmm.
And Google's legal department should be able to figure that out for you.
Yeah, I mean, we've already credited them, so. All right, thank you.
Hi. Oh, I'm scared that's gonna fall out, so I'll just leave it there. Like a lot of people in this room, I have a pretty keen interest in music supervision. And I'm drawn to that career because I feel like it is a very fast vehicle to enabling artists to have a life doing what they love. And so I'd like to think that if I were to get like a broad city level budget, that I would continue to use artists that are lesser known, but I don't know, and I'm not accusing you of doing this at all, but I think oftentimes music supervisors that have big budgets and directors who have big budgets for music end up choosing pieces that are, sometimes it feels lazy to me. And I'm just wondering what you do with that dilemma of like, oh, I want to use like lesser known artists in this particular piece, but as sometimes Queen is the only match for that moment. So how do you deal with that dilemma? Or is it a dilemma for you?
Not really. I think it depends on the thing. I mean, I think in terms of the Queen scene in Shaun of the Dead, that has to be a moment of a song which pretty much everybody knows. If you picture like an indie song which nobody knows, then the scene fails. You know, there's lots of other music in Shaun of the Dead that's much lesser known. And Queen is easily like the biggest artist, but on the same soundtrack is like 80s Matchbox, Beeline Disaster, or like Lemon Jelly, or like bands that are like, would be happy and excited to be on a soundtrack. So I think that's mostly like at that kind of level, that's the kind of thing that you do, is that like, is that you know, you will get artists who will like be so happy to be in a movie. And pretty much most of my movies have that, where there's like sort of some big songs and then lots of other artists. Even on Baby Driver, there's lots of songs that are much, much lesser known. You know, even John Spencer Blues Explosion is not like sort of a, you know, it's not Queen. It's kind of much more sort of niche and cult. So I sort of try and keep that balance. And in fact, when I was doing that TV show Spaced, that was very much what we were going for, is like, you know, sort of looking for artists who hadn't had any exposure in anything else. And to be honest, I'm always happy when there's a song that you've got in a movie that nobody has ever used in a movie before. Like, nobody has ever used Bellbottoms by the John Spencer Blues Explosion in the movie. Nobody has ever used the damned song that's in Baby Driver.
I tried. Neat.
That's never been in a movie before. So that to me is like what's good. And I think sort of, I don't think that's necessarily a problem. And I don't think, especially on a low budget movie, no producer is going to tell you to go for something bigger, because, you know, most of the time you just can't afford it. So if you find young artists who are willing, it's like a bonus for them. And I would say most producers would be on side with that, you know.
It's certainly not lazy.
Oh, again, I was not accusing you of this at all, but I do think that it's something that does happen in the music.
There's certainly lazy music choices in a lot of movies.
And certainly big Hollywood movies. There's a lot of laziness in a lot of those movies, for sure, I think. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey. Yeah. First of all, thanks for the talk so far. This is awesome. You said you came up with like the basic idea for Baby Driver like 10 years ago.
Longer, like 21 years ago.
Oh, like that.
I think I started
in
writing
the womb, I think he started.
Yeah, probably.
I started writing it 10 years ago, but the first time I heard that song by the John Spencer Blues Explosion was when that album came out, you know.
Okay, because I was thinking like in that time period, like Niklas Winding's Refn Drive came out, and also like the reverse chase scene and Kingsman and stuff like that. And I was wondering how you deal with like seeing parts of your ideas on other people's screens.
Yeah, I mean, I did worry about that, but usually I'd worry about that before I saw the movies. And then when I saw them, I mean, pretty much during that, like in that, even before, you know, there's other things like The Transporter and things like that, like very different movies, but you kind of think, anytime you hear about a movie that's got a car chase or something, you're always like worried about it. But I think, you know, even when I saw, you know, like the funny thing is like Drive and my movie are both like influenced by Walter Hill's The Driver, like a 1978 film. But when I saw that movie, I actually wasn't worried anymore, because it was actually not the movie that I was trying to make.
Yeah.
And not in terms of the sort of level of action or even the type of music.
Yeah,
so, and sometimes in some ways it ends up like teeing something up for you. I remember when me and Simon were writing Shaun of the Dead, we started writing that in 2001. And at that time on the horizon, there were like no zombie movies at all. In fact, there hadn't been one for like 15 years. It's one of the reasons we started writing the film, because we wanted to see another zombie film. And then I remember, like, first one was like Resident Evil, there was the movie. And then I remember when we were writing Shaun of the Dead, Simon called me one day and said, did you hear that Danny Boyle is making a London zombie movie? And I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Okay.
I was so mad. And I was so mad about that movie up until when I saw it. And then when I saw it, thinking, oh, it's different. This is like deadly serious. They run. It's like, and in fact, in a way, 28 Days Later, like, teed up Shaun of the Dead. You know, like, sort of, we ended up outgrossing it in the UK, but I think we wouldn't have done as well if 28 Days Later hadn't come out. Because for a lot of people, that was their first, like, zombie movie, you know, of that ilk. And so it became a benefit. And so in a way, I think sort of like, as long as you sort of like, you know, kind of, I felt, you know, so things like sort of Drive or Kingsman, I wasn't, you know, Kingsman has my stunt coordinator from Scott Pilgrim working on it. I wasn't dissuaded because I think the thing is, and sort of to go back to sticking with your gut, is if the germ of the idea is still sort of valid, and like the idea of like the sort of full-on jukebox car musical, you know, with lots of car chases as well. You know, Drive actually, in fact, same like second unit director, stunt coordinator on my movie, but Drive only really has like one proper small chase in the middle. So I sort of like, when I saw the movie, I was thinking, oh, this is a different thing. This is more like a mood piece and like a neo-noir, and mine is like a different tone. So I was worried until I saw it. And then I walked out of the multiplex having seen it going, it's going to be okay.
Perfect. Okay, thanks.
There's no John Spencer. You're cool. Okay, our last question.
This is not a very fun last question, but I'm a big fan of clever transitions and edits, and Michel Gondry's box set is filled with awesome, incredible, mind-blowing transitions and edits, and same thing with the first clip you showed, filled with like really, really remarkable transitions. And you seem to be a fan of clever transitions and edits and use them really wisely, both with whether it's like clever editing, VFX, and what have you. And so just curious to hear your thoughts on like how much time and thought and energy you put into transitions, which is a challenging thing to do, I would assume, when creating big movies, and also when incorporating music so strategically like you do, how much those clever transitions and edits save you in some cases and also painfully hurt you in some cases.
Well, usually a lot of them are written into the script, and then not all of them are, and the ones that aren't written into the script I usually do in the boards. And then sometimes there'll be something that comes up on the day where you'll have a great idea, where there's one like match cut in the movie where it goes from like overhead on a coffee cup to like a button in the elevator. And that was something where I was like in the scene and I said, oh, so maybe we should shoot this baby from over the top. And then I think, oh, in the elevator, what else is round in here? Oh, the button. Let's do a big, and then you literally do a match cut. So that's something that it wasn't in any of the storyboards, but we shot both things and then it just looks perfect, you know? So it comes at every stage, really. I think the good thing of doing transitions for me, and I learned this doing TV, and I think is like why I don't really do any improv in my movies, like even in the comedies like Shaun and Hot Fuzz and The World's End, is because the scenes all have starts and ends, and a lot of times the last line leads into the next scene. Now, a lot of like the modern like sort of vogue for improving, usually the bits that people improv around is the ends of the scenes. And a lot of the kind of Judd and sort of Seth Rogen school is that they sort of like kind of get into a riff and sort of, you know, have a situation, sort of like Curb Your Enthusiasm, where they sort of like then riff on it. But like, having done TV, I always kind of figured out if you have like sort of a very hard transition at the end of the scene, it is a way to control the running time of a show. When you're doing a TV show like Space, it's like here, it's like 22 minutes here, or Space, it was like 24 and a half. So you can't kind of like just go on and on. So actually having a thing where the camera whips off, or somebody walks in front of the camera, or in Scott Pilgrim, sometimes the lights like switch off. Like in Scott Pilgrim, we would have things like a stage blackout, like at the end of a scene. It was like we'd just turn the lights off in the studio. And it's funny because then when the actors know it's coming, it helps them sort of punch the last line. It's like last line, darkness. And it's always like a funny thing to do on set. But I think that's the thing, is it's some kind of thing of maintaining control. And with these sequences, like you know what the song is doing. So at the end of Bellbottoms, when they're driving off, Bellbottoms echoes and echoes and echoes. So it's like, oh, hang wide on the parking lot because the song would be echoing around the concrete, and you sort of know what the end is. So I think I sort of do it as part of it is like a control, but a lot of it is pre-planned. There's like sort of, it's either in the script, it's in the storyboards, or very, very occasionally something comes up on the day where you think, this would be cool, we can match these things together. But I like to do it as a way of like sort of keeping the momentum of the film going and you know, it's going back to rhythm again. Exactly, it's musical, you know. And you can also add little things like later, like there's one bit in Baby Driver where Spacey is pressing the elevator buttons, but because we knew what the kind of like the outgoing song was, we get him to press it in time with the music. And it's like now you've got like a little like flourish at the end that goes in time with the song that's ending. So they're all pre-planned. I mean, but you're right, it's like that Busby Berkeley one. Think about it, it's 1934, that shot where there's the mirror, and then it turns into like an optical, and then she comes in and picks up the mirror and flips it round. You know, like, that would have had to gone off to the lab and come back and then line it up. That probably took a week just to do that transition. But they're astonishing, and like, they used to do all that stuff in camera. They didn't have like CG or like, they didn't even have video assist or anything like that to kind of even see whether it worked. They'd just be doing a guesstimate, but those are incredible.
Cool, thanks.
Right on. Well,
Now we're going to show another 14 clips, guys.
thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you.
And thanks to Edgar Wright.